Well, good morning to some of you, and good afternoon to others here in the United States. It depends on where you're tuning in from. And we're coming to you from Dallas, Texas, from our little prayer center here in downtown Dallas. And it's good to be with you, along with my wife, Rob, and I'm Pastor Danny Davis. And we're going to be taking about 30 minutes to talk to the folks today, Robin, about marriage and the problems that spring up in marriage. In fact, I specifically want to talk to everyone today about the 7 marital strongholds that can take root in your marriage and destroy your marriage. And we know that from counseling people, we've been married coming up on
31 years.
31 years, yeah. And we know from just pastoring during that 31-year period that a lot of bad things get into marriages that destroy marriages, and counsel people off and on over 31 years, all over the country, all over the place. And for those that aren't aware of it, your chances, this is if you're a non-Christian. Surprisingly, it's worse if you are a Christian, but if you're a non-Christian, there's a 41% rate if you get married. The first time you get married, you're going to end up divorced. And there's a 60% chance if you remarry a second time that you're going to end up divorced. And by the time a person's divorced twice, they have a 73% chance of winding up divorced if they get married a third time. So I guess at that point, it's like trading in cars to the person. It's time to exchange it for a new car. And another thing I thought was very interesting about marriage, just looking up statistics at a site called Artificial Intelligence Overview, they say that 45% of people who make $10,000 a year or less, they wind up divorced, but only 30% of people who make $200,000 or more end up divorced. So the statistics go up 15% or 1/3 if you have a low income. So I think maybe that says a little bit of something about how lack of finances can put pressure on a marriage.
I believe that is one of the #1 reasons. That I read about some time back, and that could have changed, but I'm pretty sure it's still the #1 reason why people actually get a divorce is due to financial restraints.
Well, they're arguing over
lack
financial
of money,
problems.
Arguing over financial problems that they have.
Well, folks, I want to share a scripture with you today, and another major reason people wind up divorced is because anger builds up over time. And that's why in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26, the apostle tells us, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath, and don't give place to the devil. Now, we've been married 31 years, Robin, and during that 31 years, I know that you've seen me get pretty mad, and I've most certainly seen you get pretty mad. But the Bible talks about not letting the sun go down on your wrath. And
right.
So what I believe it's actually talking about there is finding a resolution if you have a problem. And I heard a marriage counselor say one time, he said, if you're married, you should never go to bed
angry.
And
It's always good to take care of the problem before you go to sleep at night, because then what happens is you give yourself the room to get a root of bitterness and resentment toward your spouse. So
it's easy to happen, if you don't hash things out or talk things out, I think you can get in trouble real fast. Especially if you let a problem fester. Now the Bible has a term for doing this. It actually has a phraseology that the Bible uses for people who don't resolve their anger issues with their spouse. And we read about that in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 15. And the Apostle Paul said, see to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble. See to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble. I always think of a root of bitterness like a weed.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with a weed, it will spring up, and it will. You can take a beautiful garden and it will overpower that garden and destroy the garden. See to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, the Apostle Paul said. So I think in marriage, a lot of times people wind up divorced in time, over time, is because a root of bitterness gets into the marriage, and then it begins to fester and mature, and before you know it, they've got their marriage is full of weeds.
Yeah.
Now, the thought that's coming to me right now is how many times I've talked to somebody over the years as a pastor, and they'll say, "Oh no, I have no root of bitterness toward my spouse," but the moment that couple gets in an argument, they'll bring up things that happened 30 years ago or 20 years ago. That's a root of bitterness. In other words, if you're married and if you're married and you keep bringing something up every time you get angry, or if you're fighting with your spouse, you're bringing up something that happened way back in the past, you have a root of bitterness. There's no question about it. You've developed a root of bitterness that you haven't dealt with. And so many, I can't tell you how many times that I've counseled people over the years, and they've told me, "Oh no, Pastor, I have no root of bitterness." But the minute they get in a good red-hot argument with their spouse, they'll start bringing things up out of the past. So clearly, the root's still there. It hasn't been dealt with.
Well, they pulled the top portion of it up. It's like anytime you go to pull a weed up, you have to make sure you get the roots up with it, because if you don't, and the roots are still underneath the surface in the soil, that weed is going to continue to, is going to grow again. So unless you completely pluck the whole entire thing up, roots and all, the situation is still lying there. It's the same aspect of just sweeping things under the rug. You can't just sweep things under the rug and expect, oh, it's just going to pass on by and things are going to get better. Until you get down to the root of the matter and get the roots and all up, the problem is not going to, you're not going to solve the problem.
And what I want to talk to the folks about today, Robin, are eight different spirits that get in marriages that cause they're strongholds. Is what I'm trying to say. They're demonic strongholds that get into marriages, and once these 8 strongholds get into marriage, well, if you have one or more of these spirits in your marriage, it will with time destroy your marriage.
Yes.
And for those of you that are married, you need to hear this. And I want to say this as well. If you're not married, you need to hear this, because these are things to avoid in a relationship if you want the relationship to work.
That's exactly why when you said that, I think about my niece who has just recently been married for going on a little over a year now. And before she even got married, she went to counseling. They set everything out. They just talked about their finances. They talked about their intimate relationship when they get married. There's a slew of things that they actually talked about, so that when they get married, they have an understanding and they have a good foundation that they can build off from, instead of just jumping in and going, okay, so what do we do about our finances? How do we resolve this problem? How do we do that? So they can have good communication skills and learn to listen to one another. So they set a foundation up for themselves, and before they got married, so they know how to handle these things.
Exactly. Now listen, if you are married, especially, even if you're not married but you want to be married, get a pen and piece of paper, because I'm going to be, along with Pastor Robin, we're going to be talking to you about 8 marital strongholds. And these are spirits that can get into your marriage and destroy your marriage. Even one of these 8 strongholds can destroy your marriage. But so often over the years, as I've counseled with people, I find out that people have 2 or 3 or 4 of these demonic strongholds in their marriage. And we're going to pick them apart over the next 20 or 30 minutes, one at a time, and look at 8 marital strongholds that you've got to get out of your marriage if you don't want to end up at divorce court or end up living with a stranger. And Robin, the first marital stronghold that I felt like I needed to put down is because I think we've run across this more than any other. demonic stronghold that gets in marriage is a spirit of bitterness.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible says in Ephesians 4:26, it's not a sin to be angry. But Paul said, be angry and sin not. Be angry and sin not. So it's the issue isn't being angry, because anger is an emotion that every human being experiences. But the Bible says, be angry and sin not. And so what happens when we become angry at something our partner does, over time, it festers and it moves from just anger over into a root of bitterness. And I think one of the most evil strongholds that gets in marriages is a spirit of bitterness, to where you just you get to a point where you can't think or speak well about that person. The spirit of bitterness.
Well, when you become angry, you know, it's like you said, it's okay to be angry, and the Bible says to be angry and sin not, like you said. But it's when you put action to that anger. When out of anger you begin to say hurtful and derogatory things toward your spouse, and that's where the bitterness begins to fester. So you can still be angry at your spouse and be silent and not say anything, and make
not always
sure
easy, though.
that it's not always easy. But you don't. But my thing is you don't have to do the name calling and say these hurtful things that a lot of people in marriage do. They want to do what they call the low blows, so they hit below the belt, and say things that they know, because they're angry, is going to really hurt them. Well, in return, that causes that root of bitterness.
Right, exactly. And what bitterness is actually you internalize anger, and it becomes a stronghold.
Yeah.
It's inside of you, and all of a sudden you get to a point where you just don't feel the same way about that person anymore. So it's a spirit of bitterness, and you have to be careful. Now, folks, if you're listening to what we're talking to you about today, Robin and I have been married 31 years, and these are 8 strongholds that we've discovered as we've talked with married couples and counseled with people, that the devil's trying to cause their marriage to fall apart. And so spirit of bitterness can be probably one of the most demonic strongholds you can get in your marriage, where you get to a point where you can't look at that person and feel right toward them or speak peaceably about them. You internalize your anger, as Pastor Robin was saying. Now, here's another spirit, Robin, that I want to talk to the people about, that I see in marriages. I never hear anybody ever talk about it, or I've never heard anybody say it causes trouble in a marriage, but it most certainly does. I've seen couples that get a spirit of competition toward each other. In other words, they're trying to outdo the other one all the time. Spirit of competition in marriage, to where you're trying to prove to that person you can do something better than they can do it.
You're smarter than they are.
You're smarter than they are. You're wiser than they are. It's a spirit of competition that gets in a lot of marriages, to where couples, rather than working together, they're actually working against each other and trying to prove to their partner that they're better at something than they are.
Right. Well, what you need to when you're married, you're a team. You become one flesh, and you're a team. So when you think about a competition, you think about, like a competition, like a game or something like that. But when you think of team, look at the word team. There's no I in team. It's not about just one person. It's not about I, little old me, little old I. It's about us. And so if you can't have a spirit of competition when you're married. You're a team. God has joined you together to get for a purpose, to get something done. And when you work together, those things can be accomplished. So just remember, when you look at the word, if you're a team and you're married, I'm on the same team that Pastor Danny Davis is on as he is mine. And we're working together. There's no I involved.
I remember a preacher came to me, Robin. Of course, I was on TV for probably 8 or 9 years before I suggested you go on television as well. And so we both wound up going on network TV, on different large television networks. And a preacher friend of mine, he said, Danny Davis, do you feel threatened? He said, Robin's actually getting a better response off of her television shows than you are. And I laughed. I said, no, I'm not threatened by it. I said, in fact, I'll carry her briefcase if she wants me to. In other words, because we're a team and we both have the same goals. I told him, I celebrated your success. He said, it doesn't bother you though as her husband? I said, no.
But that's the way it should be though.
It's the way it should
Right.
be. It's the way it should be. If you're married, you shouldn't be in competition with your
No.
spouse. And I think it's important to bring this up though, Robin, and the reason I say that is because a lot of married couples, they both have to work a job. They both have to work a job just to meet their obligations and to accomplish their goals. And sometimes the husband will have a much better job than the wife, or sometimes the wife will have a much better job than the husband. And I find couples butt heads over that. I've seen wives that get the attitude, hey, I'm the breadwinner in this family. I'm bringing home more money than you are, and so you do what I say. That's a spirit of competition.
It is. Exactly. It is a spirit of competition.
And
right.
a spirit of competition can become a demonic stronghold in a marriage. And so, again, it goes back to what we started this teaching by saying, and that's not to let the sun go down on your wrath, and don't give place to the devil. When you let the sun go down on your wrath, in other words, say a man's married to his wife, and his wife is making more money than he is, and she begins to rub that under his nose and saying, you better do this and this and this because I'm the main breadwinner in his family. Then the man begins to get a root of bitterness and he feels dishonored. And then over time, that builds up and festers inside the spouse, the man, or vice versa. It can go either way. And after a while, something's gotten in that marriage that doesn't belong there. It's demonic. It doesn't belong in that marriage. And I've seen it go the opposite way too.
Right.
You've got a wife that's got 3, 4, 5 children, and the husband's got a great job, and he's making the money, and he comes strolling in the house. Why isn't this clean? And why are there dishes in the sink? Well, she's got 4 kids there.
The hardest job in the world is to be
a mother. Yeah, but what happens a lot of times if a man's a breadwinner and he's bringing home a lot of money, he'll start bearing down on his wife. Why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? And so what that is, it becomes a spirit of competition where saying, I did my part, you better do your part.
Right.
And instead of working with the spouse, now the husband or the wife, it goes both ways, is working against their spouse because they have actually a spirit of competition where they feel like they're over here and you're over there and you better do your part over there. And that can become a demonic stronghold that, given time, can destroy a marriage and cause a couple to end up in divorce court. So that's the second marital stronghold that I've thought a lot about that we've dealt with down through the years with people we've counseled with. Now there's a third one that I think is also very important. This is a stronghold that's very important to recognize in marriage, and it's the spirit of jealousy. The spirit of jealousy. I remember years ago, before we were even married, probably 34 years ago, I was pastoring in Saginaw, Michigan, and had a beautiful young lady coming to the church. She was probably 18, and she's a very beautiful girl, but she'd come from an unstable family life. Her father had abandoned them early on in life. And so then I have this young man start coming to the church. He's very handsome. And he was a salesman. He had to travel during the week and was gone 3 or 4 days every week because he was in sales work for some big company that he worked for. And he was doing fantastic financially. And so I noticed they start looking at each other. I would notice from the pulpit they were staring at each other during church. And finally one Sunday he ran back to the back of the church and started talking her up, chatting with her. And I watched as the whole relationship evolved. And I knew where it was headed. And one day they both came to me and said, Pastor Danny Davis, we would like to get married. They were just a beautiful young couple. And can we counsel? Can we counsel with you? I said, sure. So I remember the main person I had to focus on was the wife-to-be, the young lady, because I knew her background. I knew she grew up very insecure. Her father abandoned the household, and she grew up without a male figure in the house. And so when I counseled her, I talked to her and I said, now listen, you realize that this young man you're going to marry, he has to travel. He's going to be gone 3 or 4 days a week. I said, you're aware of that, and you recognize now if you get married, you're going to have to deal with, oh yes, Pastor, yes. And so I counseled both sides, and finally we did the wedding at the church, and they got married. It wasn't 3 months before they began to have marital problems. And the reason why, she would call her husband. He would be in a business meeting. He was off in another state, which is what was his job, which she knew that before she married him. And she would call him right in the middle of a business meeting. Well, what are you doing right now? Honey, I can't talk to you right now. I'm in a meeting. Well, who are you meeting with? And so this began to happen, and she began to call him, really ruining his income. And so they came to me 4 or 5 times, I imagine, counseled about it. And so finally I told her, I said, now listen, I said, you knew what your husband did for a living before you married him. And why now are you so full of fear and insecurity? Well, how do I know what he's doing when he's out there on the road? And I said, well, he was out there on the road when you were dating him. Well, how do I know? And I said, well, you have to give it to God. But you know, that young lady could never turn loose of that spirit of jealousy and insecurity about her husband. And it didn't take too many years before they were divorced.
Yep.
Because the spirit of jealousy.
The green-eyed devil.
Green-eyed devil. It got in their marriage and destroyed their marriage. And I guess we've seen that a lot over the years, and people that that just can't quite seem to give their spouse to God and not worry about it.
Right. Well, if any of us would admit that there has been times in our marriage or relationships that we have experienced some form of jealousy. I mean, I think everyone has. But it's when where the danger comes in at, like Pastor Davis was saying, is when it begins to consume you.
Becomes a spirit.
It's a spirit that that gets a hold of you, and that's all you think about. All you think about, like that young lady who's thinking about, well, what's my husband doing? What's he up to? Is he really in a meeting? Is he doing this? And it begins to control your mind and gets a hold of you, and that's where it becomes unhealthy. And
you know what, Robin, not to interrupt you, but I don't believe he ever was running around on her.
I don't think he was.
He was doing his job, is all he was doing.
I think she lacked the confidence and the security. But on the flip side of the coin, I think it was her husband. I think, and maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but a lot of times when there's an insecure partner, I think it's the husband or the other, or the spouse, or whoever which side it's on, is to bring security and reassurance to that spouse, to let them know, listen, I love you, da 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 da, you know, this is not happening, blah 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 blah, and to prove themselves to their spouse, to let them know that what you're thinking about and what's consuming you is not healthy, and this is not happening.
Well, you know, one time when I was counseling them, because this became a major demonic stronghold in their marriage. And one time when I was counseling, I had them both in the office, and I just asked him point blank, I said, Jim, are you running around on your wife? He said, no, Pastor. He said, honestly, I love my wife. I don't want anybody else. Well, how do I know that? How do I know that? She kept saying. And so
she was very insecure.
It was
very
a spirit.
Insecure.
It became a spirit, and
it's all consuming.
Yeah, and that's these 8 spirits, these 8 strongholds, marital strongholds that we're talking about today. Believe me, if people let them into their marriage and they nurture them, they will wind up in divorce court with time, or if not, they'll wind up living with a stranger.
For sure, you'll just be roommates.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this. We've covered 3 of them. We've got the spirit of bitterness, and then the spirit of competition, and now we've talked about the spirit of jealousy. But I think one of the most ugly spirits that I've seen get in marriages is the spirit of disrespect. The spirit of disrespect, where you know, you're with your life partner, and yet you can't say anything that's not ugly toward that person. It's a spirit of disrespect, and of course we know what disrespect is. Disrespect's when you reach a point where you just really don't care what the person's opinion is of you or not. The spirit of disrespect, and that's a terrible demonic spirit to get in your marriage, where couples, they don't respect each other anymore, and I can give a lot of examples of that. When a couple is dating, you know, the man will, you know, he'll clean up and shave, and he'll show up at the front door with a handful of roses in his hand, and then he wants to take his wife to be, or his girlfriend, to the best restaurant in town, and that's a spirit of respect, and relationships start out in a spirit of respect. But then people get married, And then they don't care how they look anymore, and the man wants to lay around on the couch, and he's not showing up with flowers anymore because he figures, well, I'm married
I already
now.
got them.
I got her
so
now.
why do I have to do that?
Yeah, I don't have
Yeah.
to do that anymore. I got what I was after. She's married to me now. That's a spirit of disrespect, and when you disrespect a person, you're unwilling to do the maintenance that is required to make the relationship healthy. And a lot of, I think probably more than any other spirit I see that gets in marriages, is a spirit of disrespect, a spirit of just not caring what the person thinks anymore. And I've talked to people that I know they're headed toward divorce court, and they'll say, well, who's she going to find anyway? Or who there's not going to find anybody better than me. That's disrespect. When you begin to take that person for granted and you think that they can't make it without you, well, you're headed for a divorce court.
Well, when you first enter into a relationship, as we enter in relationships, we get into a relationship and we're in the esteem zone with that person. There's nothing that person can do wrong. We esteem them. We lift them up. We're bringing them flowers. We're dressing the way we're putting our makeup on, making sure our hair is right, dressing. And then what happens is, I think we get in what's called a familiarity zone.
Yep.
And we get way too comfortable in our relationships. And this is not saying that wives can't lay around some days in there, if you're a mother and wear your sweats and a t-shirt or whatever like that. Some people say, oh my God, they're attacking me because I'm wearing my sweatshirt. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you get into the point where you get what I call too comfortable in your relationship, and you take for granted the other person, and you start to just kind of get a little slothful, maybe in your appearance.
And nobody does that when they're dating.
When they're dating, they don't. So I think it's very important. That's what they tell you, how to keep the fire alive in your marriage. Well, you're not going to keep the fire alive. I mean, you should still love someone if they're wearing their sweatpants, but you're not going to keep the fire alive if they're walking around every single day with the
hair looking like a rag mop.
Hair looking like you just hopped out of bed. Yep. And wearing slippers, SpongeBob slippers and SpongeBob SquarePants, pajamas. It's just
spirit of disrespect towards your spouse.
You have to remember those things as when go out on the dates, dress up, look good for your spouse, and people, those things fall to the wayside a lot.
And I think too, you have to, in marriage, as we talk about people allowing a spirit of disrespect into a marriage, as you grow to know your spouse better, there's certain things they like to do or don't like to do, and you have to kind of respect that person enough, even if a lot of times I watch things on TV I don't want to watch because I know you want to watch.
He knows I want to watch it.
Yeah, and vice versa, I'm sure.
Right.
And so that's a spirit of respect that you have to have toward your spouse. Now, a person that has disrespect for their spouse, they'll come and change the channel right while they're...
Oh yeah, they don't care. They have total disregard for how the other person feels.
And that's a spirit that can get into a marriage.
Right.
Now, the fifth stronghold that I see getting in marriages, and I almost find it a sad spirit when I see it in people that are married, is the spirit of disregard. To disregard something is, for instance, let's say you've had an old pair of shoes, and then you buy a new pair. Just throw the old pair in the corner because you got a new pair now.
Right.
And you don't really care about those old shoes anymore. They're just sitting in the corner collecting dust.
And you just walk by it every day and you don't
care that they're even there.
Right.
It's so sad, I think, when I see people that are married and one or both members of the marriage, they have a spirit of disregard toward the other person. They don't really care if they like what the other person, the other person, they don't care if their spouse likes what they're doing or doesn't like it. They really don't give a, not to be crude, but they don't give a crap one way or another about how their spouse feels about where they're going or what they're doing or when they'll be home. When are you going to be home? Well, that's none of your business. I'll be home when I get home. That's a spirit of disregard, to where you treat that person as though they're worthless. And I find that's one of the most sad strongholds. One of the most
Yes.
sad strongholds that I see get in marriage is a spirit of disregard, where a person doesn't really care if they're hurting their spouse
Yeah.
or not. It's a
Yeah.
spirit of disregard. The person's going to do their own thing, and they could care less how it's impacting their spouse. Spirit of disregard, and it can affect a lot of things. I've watched people down through the years, their spouse's birthday will roll around, they don't buy them a birthday gift. Their
Yeah.
anniversary rolls around, they don't even remember it's their anniversary.
Right.
It's a sad demonic stronghold that
Right.
gets in a marriage when the spirit of disregard gets on you, to where you really don't give a crap one way or another how
Yeah.
your spouse feels anymore. And you are most definitely, if you get a spirit of disregard on you, to where you just really don't care what you're doing, how it's going to impact your relationship with your spouse, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to come home one day and find out your spouse is seeing somebody else, or you're going to find out that your spouse doesn't care if you never come home again.
Right. Yeah.
Spirit of disregard almost always given enough time, it results in divorce court.
Yeah. I use the analogy of the fact you go to the store and you buy yourself a plant. Okay, that plant's beautiful, but there are things that you have to do with that plant to keep it alive, just as you would with a relationship.
Yeah.
You just can't walk by the plant and disregard it every single day and say, oh, well, that's a really pretty, oh, that plant's so beautiful, and not expect to water it. And how are you going to water it? How would you water your relationship? You would water your relationship by the words that you speak to your spouse. Make sure those things that you say to your spouse are loving and kind and respectful, and show those things. Not only does a plant needs to have the proper light. If you just put it in a dark corner and it doesn't have the proper light, it's not going to survive. Same thing if you don't give it the food and the fertilizer to make it grow, because in a relationship you should grow together and become stronger and a better team and grow together. So it's in the same way your relationship is like a plant, and I've used this with people before, the analogy that you just can't walk by a plant. I'll say it again. You can't walk by it, not make sure it has proper light, not fertilize it, not water, and expect it to just grow and flourish.
I think
just like a relationship,
what you're talking
because
about,
it will not.
It requires maintenance.
Exactly. There's things that you have to do, and if you just disregard it and walk by it like it's an old pair of shoes that you're not using anymore and you don't care about, it's going to die.
Okay, so we're talking about 8 demonic marital strongholds. We've dealt with the spirit of bitterness. Mm-hmm. We've dealt with the spirit of competition that gets on people in marriage. Mm-hmm. We've dealt with the spirit of jealousy. We've talked about the spirit of disrespect. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the spirit of disregard. But there are 3 more that I want to bring in, and because these are all evil spirits that if they get in your relationship, they will destroy your marriage and your home eventually. And there's the spirit of dishonor. Mm-hmm. Now, Paul very clearly tells us, he says, husbands, love your wives and honor your wife. And again, Paul says, wives, honor your husband and love your husband. Paul tells a man to love his wife and nurture his wife as he would his own body. Mm-hmm. Paul uses that analogy. And so there's a spirit of dishonor that can get in a marriage, to where the things that you say about your spouse, it dishonors your spouse when you speak evil of your spouse. Mm-hmm. And I can always spot a person who has a spiritual marriage and a good marriage by the way they talk about their spouse. Right. Whether you honor or you dishonor your spouse, because we're commanded in Scripture to honor our spouse and to treat them as our own flesh. But a lot of marriages that I see, people let a spirit of dishonor get in their marriage, and they begin to dishonor their spouse by the things that they say and also by the things that they do. And dishonor can be an ugly, evil, demonic spirit that gets into your marriage, and it will eventually destroy your marriage, because I think for a man especially, now wives need love, but men need to be honored.
Right.
That's, I think, more than
They need their ego built up.
Well, that's honor.
Yeah.
That's honor. When you speak, when you speak with respect toward your spouse, and you honor your spouse, that's a very important thing in a marriage. Wives need that love and need a hug and need to know that you're there. But I think men need to be honored more
Right.
than they need a hug or the honor is the most important thing. And so many people I notice they dishonor their spouse. They talk kinder and more affectionately about the family dog than they do their spouse.
Right.
And
They treat their spouse like a doormat. I see it a lot. They don't.
I do too.
It's like, if you really think about the scripture, if you really take it to heart of what the scripture is saying, when husbands love your wife as Christ loved the church, think about that for a moment. Take a moment and think about what that actually means.
well, Jesus went to the cross for the church.
Exactly. Jesus laid
gave his
down
life.
his life for the church. Jesus laid down his life for you, and he loves the church so much. So husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. I mean, that speaks volumes of how a husband should treat his wife.
Well, let's go
But
back.
then the Bible says that wives should submit to their husbands and honor their husbands. And that's not, and I think back when I did a wedding many years ago, and there was the bride, when we were doing the rehearsal, had an issue with saying love, honor, and respect. And I thought to myself, and there was part of there said obey, and she says, I'm not going to obey him. I'm not going to honor. What's that? What are you talking about? And because she was such, I'm thinking this is not going to go over very well. So because she was such a rebel, we had to take that portion out of she was adamant about the fact.
Well,
that
she was already on her way to a divorce. Hadn't even gotten married yet.
Would not say that word. But let's understand that when the Bible says that, it's not hard when a marriage is lined up with the Word of God and you're in agreement and you are a team and you love, honor, and respect each other, for those things all those things fall in line. And it's not difficult. Like with us, it's not, everybody says, well, love, honor, and obey. Pastor Danny and I are a team. It's not hard. We do things for each other all the time, and we don't even think about doing those things. When your heart's in the right place, you don't even, it's not even a second thought about thinking about the other person before you think about yourself and doing something for that person.
Exactly. Now let's rehash, because I asked people to take notes on these 8 demonic marital strongholds. So number 1, we got the spirit of bitterness that gets in a marriage. Number 2, the spirit of competition. Number 3, the spirit of jealousy. Number 4, the spirit of disrespect. Number 5, the spirit of disregard, where you just don't care one way or another, what happens with your spouse. Number 6, the spirit of dishonor, where you begin to dishonor your spouse and you don't honor them. Now here's the 7th one. We've got 2 left, and it's the spirit of disloyalty. Mm-hmm. Now I've noticed down through the years, when the Apostle Paul was teaching on marriage, he said, therefore shall a man leave his mother, and a woman leave her home. Mm-hmm. And when I begin to talk about the spirit of dishonor, I have noticed that a lot of times women get married, especially, and men too, because there's some men, they never, the umbilical cord was never cut.
Right.
I've had men, I've counseled couples, and the man say, she doesn't iron my shirts like my mother did, and she doesn't cook my breakfast the same way my mother did. They still haven't cut the umbilical cord. And then, of course, I think more so than even men, I've noticed that women get married and they continue to talk on the telephone to their mothers and allow the mother to influence the marriage. And that's a spirit of disloyalty. Paul said, therefore, a man shall leave his mother and a woman shall leave her home.
Right.
And so, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. If you're married, your loyalty has to be number one to Jesus Christ and number two to your spouse. Your mother doesn't matter anymore. Your best friend that you used to tell all your deep, dark secrets to, you no longer should be doing that. Your loyalty should be to your spouse. And I noticed that a lot of marriages are falling apart because there's a spirit of disloyalty in the marriage. And
well, when you set good boundaries, I think first and foremost in a relationship you should have boundaries. There's things you shouldn't say and should not do. And healthy boundaries, if you set healthy boundaries, you don't have to worry about those things happening. If you make up in your mind that I'm not going to do A, B, or C, those healthy boundaries, and this is where we get ourselves in trouble because we don't set healthy boundaries within our relationship and say, well, no, that's something you should not do. You're married, you don't belong there, you shouldn't be doing that. So setting healthy boundaries in your marriage is very, very important.
well, again, going back to family getting involved in your marriage, and
It's a boundary that should not
it's a
be
boundary that
stepped
shouldn't
over.
be there.
Right.
And I did a short, for YouTube and social media called "Meddling Mother-in-Laws," and boy, did that ever.
People got mad.
They got mad about that. But let me say this: it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you're married, every marriage is going to have problems. There's going to be arguments. There's going to be things you don't agree about. You have no business going to your mother and talking to your mother about your marital problems, meddling mother-in-laws, because you know my mother right up till the day she died. If I'd killed somebody, she would have probably put her arms around me and said, "Now, Danny, I know there's a reason you killed that person, and I'll help you bury him in the backyard." My mother was that way. I could do no wrong with my mother, and so you get meddling mother-in-laws that the moment there's any kind of a problem that arises in a marriage, they'll jump right in and side with their child, of course.
Of course.
So if you want somebody to agree with you when you have an attitude toward your spouse, there's nobody, for the most part, and for most people, that you can run to quicker than your mother. And your mother will say, "Well, you're right. I always told you they weren't good enough for you to start with." And of course, I built a home for my mother right next door to us that she spent her retirement years in up until it got to a point where she couldn't be by herself anymore. And there were plenty of times we had arguments during the time, the 10 years that she lived in that house next door to us. Never one time did I ever run over and talk to my mother, because I already knew my mother would agree with me, and you would be the bad guy.
Right.
So there has to be a spirit of loyalty toward your spouse, to where when you take those marriage vows and you say, "Forsaking all others, I will cleave only unto you."
Right.
That's talking about loyalty to your spouse. That's the one person God commands you and demands that you be loyal to, and God says the others don't count. The others don't count. And a lot of women wind up in affairs because they had a boyfriend before they got married, and then along comes this person they fall in love with, and they marry this person. Well, time passes. Now all of a sudden in the marriage they're having an argument or a dispute, or they're disagreeing. And if they're still in contact with that old boyfriend,
They're going to run to them.
they're going to run to
Talk
them.
them.
And that boyfriend...
Give them an earful.
And give them an earful, and that boyfriend, of course, is going to agree with his ex-girlfriend, because he's still hoping to get something he was getting before.
Of course.
And so there's a spirit of disloyalty that you cannot allow to get in your marriage, and if you do, you're going to end up in divorce court. And here's something else I want to bring up, Robin. This is going to be maybe a little crude. Maybe I'm going to make a couple of you mad, and you can say, "Oh, he's a pastor. I can't believe he said that." But listen to me. I want to talk to you about something. Okay, so you're married. And these days, the inflation we're in right now, I think it's something like 70% of all married couples, they both have to work just to make ends meet. Okay, so It does, and don't go getting hyper spiritual with me, because you can't tell me if you're married that you don't have arguments. I said it on social media one day when people come to me, oh, we never argue, we never have
That's
disputes with
baloney.
each other. I said it right on social media. I said, whenever somebody comes and talks to me like that, I start smelling a cattle yard off in the distance.
Exactly.
Because I know what I'm smelling is coming from a bull.
Right.
And so I'm going to leave that alone. But I want you to look at this situation as we wrap things up. So you're married. Now you have an argument, okay? And there's some guy at work that's always complimenting you. And I want to tell you what that guy really wants. If you really want to know what that guy wants, he wants to spend an evening with you at the Motel 6 or whatever the cheapest motel he can find. And what he wants has nothing to do with love.
Nope.
And I'm going to say that because men are dogs. Right. And 90% of men that you'll ever meet, they're after something. And it's not someone to buy roses for or somebody to take to dinner. Most men are dogs, and a man that will sit around and stroke a married woman and tell her what she wants to hear, he's after one thing, and it's not a relationship. Okay, right. So now you go to work. You've had an argument with your husband, and you're still upset with your husband, and you go to work, and here's this guy that you work with who's always complimenting you, and so, well, you don't look happy today. Are you all right? Well, I'm fine. You know, something's troubling you. I know it is. Well, I had an argument with my husband today, and well, what did he say? And then he begins to tell you, oh, if you were my woman, I'd never treat you like that. And if you were my woman, I would always treat you like a queen. So that's exactly what you're wanting to hear, because you had a fight with your husband.
All lies.
So now it's all lies. Exactly, it's all lies. The guy's telling you what he needs to say to get what he wants at the Motel 6.
Slick willies is what I call them.
Yeah, they're slick
For
willies.
A lot of people like that.
So if you are married, and then this applies to men the same as it does women. It's probably 50-50.
Some people say, "What are you talking about the woman? All of us women. It's men too."
It's a highway that runs.
Let me tell you, some women are dogs too.
That's right, and this is a highway that runs north and south. It doesn't run one direction. But if you are married, and you have to work with somebody or be around somebody of the opposite sex, and you are talking to that person about your marriage, which is none of their business, then you are disloyal. You have a spirit of disloyalty on you. And when you wind up in divorce court, you remember what I taught you today, because if you wind up in divorce court, it's going to be your own fault, because you've allowed a demonic spirit of disloyalty to get on you, to where you will talk about your spouse to that person, and that person is motivated by the devil because they want something from you. And it's not conversation, just so you know that.
Right. And that's where I would tell you that you have to set healthy boundaries.
Yes.
You have to. That is an absolute must, because you cannot allow somebody to step over the line. Once you go over that line, it becomes easier and easier and easier. You have to make the ultimate decision that this is a boundary that I will not step over. I will not do this, because once you make that step over that line, then it becomes easier and easier and easier. And you begin to lean in a little further toward the person that's telling you, whispering sweet nothings in your ear at your job. And then before you know it, we all know what happens.
And I think it's, as we talk about the spirit of disloyalty, there's been that they're married and they go in chat rooms and they're talking smack to women in chat rooms.
I have actually had people that I have actually counseled with, that you and I both have counseled with, women in the past in church, where their husbands have actually done that.
And it's emotional adultery, is all it is.
It's exactly what it is. You are dishonoring. Not only are you dishonoring your spouse, you're disloyal to your spouse. It is. It's any way you look at it, because they're looking at that other person, talking to that other person, communicate with them in an intimate level emotionally. So you're right. It's
emotional adultery. And for the most part, when you're disloyal to your spouse and you're doing that, it's going to result in physical adultery with time
Yep,
as well.
exactly. You're opening, that's why I say you're taking a step over the line of the boundary. And once you take that step over the line, it becomes easier and easier and easier. First, you're talking to them, and before you know it,
The rest is
you're
happening.
leaning in further and further and further to them before you end up, hopping
Okay.
into bed with that person.
So we've dealt with 7 demonic marital strongholds, and we're going to deal with the final one, the 8th one. We've dealt with the spirit of bitterness, the spirit of competition, spirit of jealousy, the spirit of disrespect, the spirit of disregard, the spirit of dishonor, and just now we were talking about the spirit of disloyalty. Now there's a final spirit that often gets on someone in marriage, and this one I think traces back often, for the most part, to childhood, and it's the spirit of abuse.
And it can be generational depending on where it comes
It
from.
can be. Often
Yeah.
it is a generational sin. The spirit of abuse. Now this can be verbal abuse,
Yep.
or it can actually be physical abuse.
Correct.
And I found that for the most part, people I've counseled down through the years, that they have a spirit of abuse on them. They're dealing with they're in a marriage where there's a spirit of abuse. If you look at the spouse, you find out that they came out of a home where that was already going on.
Well, I know that when I just talked a moment ago about that sister in the church, and her husband was going into chat rooms and also looking at pornography and things of that nature. But she would tell us times that he would come home and he would become he was never physical with her, but he was very emotionally abusive with her.
And verbally abusive.
And verbally abusive with her. And where that stemmed from came back from his own mother, because even when they were dating each other, she remembers seeing his own mother verbally abusing him, taking him while he was, she remembers a time when he was up on this in the staircase, and his mom grabbed him by the arm and yanked him down the stairs by his legs, and his legs were all rug burn and like that, and was always verbally abusive. And she, when this happened, looked over at her, what was going to be her future father-in-law, and he just sat there and didn't say one word, just sat there silent, and she looked at him, are you gonna do anything? He didn't do a thing.
So it was a generational curse that was handed down to this man. And you know what, Robin? Of course, we pastored this couple, and I don't think you could have found a sweeter wife than he had.
And the sad part is they're not married today.
No, they're divorced, yeah.
Because the whole situation that he became involved in by being online, and eventually he had an affair, and they divorced.
You lose respect.
Yeah.
And you get out of bed one morning and say, I don't want to bother
And she
being with this
became
person
very
anymore.
bitter.
Oh yeah, the truth of the matter is, we talked to her since years ago, and she's a man hater now.
Yeah.
And the only man she can be with is somebody who's
She can control herself.
that she can control the men now, which is out of order biblically as well.
Yeah.
So it's created a whole new generational curse that's going to come down through her side of the family now.
Yep.
Because of that sin, the sin of abuse. So
Yeah.
abuse can be emotional abuse, it can be verbal abuse, and often it can be physical abuse, and that comes down through a child growing up seeing their parent beating on the other
Right.
parent, and so then they snap in marriage, and all of a sudden the person that someone thought they married, it's like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all of a sudden they're wadding their fist up and,
Yeah.
and they become abusive because of it's generational curse that's been handed down to them through family. And so these are eight different demonic marital strongholds that can get into your life and destroy your marriage. So if you're not married, you better really be thinking about these 8 things before you get married. If you are married, you better be taking a strong look at these 8 different demonic strongholds that can get into your marriage, and make sure you don't have any of these in your marriage. And so Robin and I will be back again the turn of the week, and we're going to be talking to you again about just everyday living and what things that are going on around us. And I think marriage is a good thing to talk about, because it's probably one of the most difficult things that people deal with in
And I
life.
think especially now, since we're facing a lot of things in society today due to inflation and our jobs and things like that. I think that marriage has seen more of a test than ever before with what's been going on in the world today. And of course, the devil is fighting more than he has before, because we all know he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, as we can see with, if you look up the percentages of people that stay married and get divorced. And so we need to really set a good foundation before we get married. Like I said earlier, set that foundation, build from that foundation, and don't allow the devil to get a foothold. And if you do get angry, don't let the sun go down in your anger. Deal with that, resolve that issue, because like a weed, if you don't get the root up, what's going to happen? It's just going to continue to grow, and it's going to grow and continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can't just sweep it under the rug and expect it to go away.
Now, Robin, it's not unusual for us to get 40 or 50 or 60 letters a day here at the prayer center, and I think we're becoming exposed to new people that we've never met, that we haven't afforded our ministry of prayer to. And I think starting next week, let's start putting an 800 number up, and folks can call and we can start corresponding with them if they have prayer needs, to where we can help, be a help to them as well. Now, in closing, I'd like to have you share the 3 things we'd like for people to do. We're new to social media as a couple, but I'd like to watch this ministry grow and reach out to more and more people. But there's 3 things folks can do if they want to help us to do that. So I'm going to have you share those 3 things, if you will.
Well, whatever social media platform you're watching this on, I want you to like this podcast, this live podcast.
Hit the like button.
Hit the like button. I want you to share it. Share it to somebody. Like I said, share it to your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your outlaw, your sister-in-law. Subscribe. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to Danny Davis Ministries, or Pastor Danny Davis's channel. So like, share, and subscribe these, and get the word out, and let people know we're going to be on every single day, and let them so that they can listen to what we have to say for that day. We have new topics every single day. So like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, and if you'll do that, folks, we can reach more people with the gospel. So we do want to thank you for joining us today as we've talked about the 8 demonic strongholds that can get in your marriage. We'll be back again Monday discussing life again with you. I'm Pastor Danny Davis, and along with my wife, Pastor Robin Davis, as we always say, every time that we come to folks, whether it's through television or radio or social media, if you'll go with God,
God will go with you.